Have you recently started to date somebody who you think might be an avoidant, and you're beginning to wonder what they expect from dating? For example, how often they're hoping that you'll text each other, call each other, perhaps talk on the phone, and even the frequency of time you might begin spending together now that you've started to actually hang out in a potentially romantic way. Well, if this is you and you're feeling confused or overwhelmed about the situation and not sure what their expectations are and how they expect dating to go, in today's video, we are going to cover what a dismissive avoidant attachment style expects from dating. We'll talk a little bit about some of the general expectations. And then if you stick around until the very end, I'll actually give you a really powerful exercise I used to use with many clients when they were feeling a little bit dysregulated or triggered by somebody who they were dating who was avoidant. And they were starting to feel like, why aren't they texting me enough? And it's the goal within this exercise that you'll be able to walk away at the end of this exercise feeling super clear, feeling super regulated with a really powerful step that will help you in this relationship dynamic going forward. So, if you're new here, my name is Thais. I'm the founder of the Personal Development School and ran a very busy client based practice for the better part of a decade prior to launching PDS, which has many, many online courses for personal development, specifically for attachment styles. So it's really important that as we dig into this topic, we start by approaching it from the perspective of understanding that every single person is different. And every single person who is different also has different programming. Okay. So I think something that we have to just get out of the way first is this idea that when you grow up and you're in a home where behavior is modeled to you, where you have your parents interacting and you see how often they are affectionate, how often they are affirming one another or validating, reassuring each other, how present they are with one another. All these different patterns that you observe or that are modeled to you are basically conditioning the way you come to see relationships. And whenever we are exposed to repetitively over time, tends to essentially program how we expect relationships to go. Now, obviously, when we talk about an avoidant attachment style generally has much lower expectations of the investment that should be made in a relationship. They tend to think that everybody's really independent and they should sort of come together, every so often to exchange a little bit of their needs or to spend a little bit of time. But there's this really underlying strong expectation that says, we're supposed to both take care of ourselves and we'll spend some time in harmony hanging out together. Whereas for a lot of different attachment styles, there's much more expectation for like depth of connection, for frequency and intensity of investment. So there's basically 7 must knows that I'm going to take you through first. I actually map them out here for you on a slide so you can see them for yourself. You can even like take a picture of this if it's helpful for you. But there's some really important must knows, and then we'll do this exercise together at the end. So one of the first big things here is that dismissive avoidants are slow to warm up and to really catch feelings. They take a longer time to develop feelings because they're not really as vulnerable. And the more vulnerable we feel, there is a correlation with how deeply we will feel attached to somebody or how much we will attach. So they're a lot slower to warm up. They can definitely feel like attraction or excitement about somebody, but they tend to be much slower to go from like attraction or excitement into actual romantic feelings with somebody. So that's like one first really important thing to touch on here. Another big thing here is you'll see that they don't like to overcompromise and extend themselves too much. It's very rare for an avoidant to be in a situation where they'll feel like, okay, here I am. I'm interested in this person. I really want to go out of my way here to compromise my time. If I need a certain amount of time to myself each week, who cares? I'm dating somebody new. That's not the type of thing that they will do. Whereas you may see with like fearful avoidance or anxious attachment styles that if they really like somebody, they're very quick to put the relationship to themselves on the back burner in favor of somebody else. Whereas dismissive avoidance, that is not their programming, not their conditioning. They tend to really not like to overcompromise, overextend, and spend too much time with somebody. They also generally don't want to be too vulnerable and share too deeply about their feelings, their fears, anything that they would perceive as their own flaws. They tend to want to sort of keep under wraps and keep really private. And if they do share these things, they may even pull away after the fact because you may see them share and be open. And then the next day, they may feel very vulnerable about it. And they tend to experience something originally coined by Brene Brown called a vulnerability hangover, where they're kind of like feeling the lingering shame after being vulnerable, it's not because it's naturally supposed to happen that we feel ashamed after vulnerability. We experience that if we were conditioned that way. So, generally, because dismissive avoidance go through a lot of childhood emotional neglect, usually when there's a lot of neglect, we internalize a lot of shame because a child grows up in a household going, what's wrong with me that I can't get my needs met? They have these needs biologically that they're yearning for from their parents and caregivers. But if those parents are not emotionally available for those things, then they internalize and think, oh, there must be something wrong with me that I can't get my emotional needs met. And so they tend to feel a lot of shame whenever they feel vulnerability as adults. And you may even see because of this that a dismissive avoidant, after opening up to somebody, may even pull away for like hours and hours, maybe even days at a time, because they're really kind of feeling the wrath of their own shame, even though what they said or did that they were vulnerable about may have nothing to do with anything shameful. Another big thing is you'll generally see, and these are usually the things that people want to know the most, you'll generally see that dismissive avoidance expect sort of text exchanges when they're first getting to know somebody, specific in the dating stage of the relationship, by the way. This will change if you go into the honeymoon stage or the power struggle stage or the stability or commitment or bliss stages of relationship. But particularly in the dating stage, you'll tend to expect a couple short exchanges daily, maybe like a little back and forth in the morning, a little back and forth late in the evening, but like kind of in general, a few text message exchanges per day. If they're doing that, that generally indicates they're very interested. Um, and if they're still somewhat interested, you may hear from them 3 or 4 times a week, but not every day. And that could still be an indicator that a dismissive avoidant is interested because, again, from their expectations, they're hoping to chat a little bit, but they don't have programs that think, oh, if I like somebody, I should talk to them all day throughout the day. That's just not their experience. And then also, in terms of time spent together, generally we're going to see that that a dismissive avoidant expects to maybe see each other, once a week for a date, maybe twice a week. There can be many variables here because you may see, for example, that if somebody is, they have children, they're a single parent, they have two jobs, that may even go down. But as a baseline rule, if somebody sort of has like a normal lifestyle without being too taxed in other ways or without it being a long distance relationship, for example, 1 or 2 times per week tends to be sort of the goal. And dismissive avoidant attachment styles, it's quite common. It's not always the case, but it is quite common that they will not like to talk on the phone. So don't let that be something that you take really personally. It doesn't mean they're like super disinterested. But also, it's important to have healthy standards, right, for what you want. So I'm going to take you through a bit of an exercise here, and we can do this together. One of the first things I want you to take a look at here, if you look at part A, is I want you to ask yourself, what are my ideal expectations? Okay. So if I'm dating somebody, I'm getting to know them, how often would we text if I could wave a magic wand and, just make things happen the way I want them to? Okay. So would this be that you text all day, every day? Would this be that you have a few exchanges throughout the day? And I want you to just think of like what your sort of operating standard is. This is going to help you acknowledge your own programming in terms of your own subconscious expectations. The things that you're hoping for without even realizing that you're hoping for them. So for example, if you're feeling triggered that a dismissive avoidant isn't texting you all day and you realize, yeah, I guess I would like for somebody to text me all day every day, then that's probably your subconscious expectation. If instead you're like, well, I was hoping to talk on the phone every day, we don't talk on the phone every day, that's probably your subconscious expectation. So I want you to just like surface these things first in terms of how frequently you expect somebody to text message with you, how often you expect somebody to call you, and how often you expect them to spend time with you in person on a date. Okay. So if you're long distance, it could be that you have like a Zoom date or something like that. But I want you to try to surface these expectations and try to really understand about them. And then in part B here, I want you to ask yourself instead, what is a healthy standard? Like, what's a secure standard? And I'll actually tell you a little bit about this. I'll even fill it in here. So, generally, and the reason we do this is because I'm trying to get you to see the difference between these subconscious expectations, especially if they're very anxiously oriented, versus what would still indicate somebody's interested. And you find that it's a healthy amount of discussion and conversation and time spent together to have in early days of dating somebody. So, for example, you may see that, in securely attached relationships, generally you are going to have an AM or a morning text exchange. Now, it may be slightly longer than you would see with a dismissive avoidant. There might be more detailed messages that go back and forth, that are a little more conversational, maybe a little bit more vulnerable, a little more detailed, maybe a little lengthier than you would see with a dismissive avoidant. But there's probably going to be a text exchange of maybe like three, four, five, six, maybe text messages in the sort of morning, and same thing in the afternoon or evening. So you'll see that there's still, with a securely attached person, exchange. Um, Generally, although the messages can be a little bit lengthier, more thoughtful, you'll generally see these kinds of interactions. Then you may see 1 to 3 calls per week, okay, on the phone. Outside of like, hey, I'm here at the date and just checking in there, like an actual call to just chat, just to get to know each other. And again, this will change a little bit depending on how far into the dating stage you are. If it's really early, you may not see these things for those initial few weeks, few dates, but sort of later into the dating stage. The first week it would be a little bit less than this, obviously, the first couple weeks. And then after your 1 to 3 calls per week, you may see that the securely attached person generally wants to hang out 2 to 4 times per week. Probably generally 2 to 3 is what you'll see more, unless we're with somebody who's more anxious and then they kind of may move the needle and sort of push that towards the 4 mark. So this is sort of what I've recounted from having many conversations over the past, 12, 14 years, with a lot of securely attached people who earn secure, and these are sort of the ballpark of what you'll see. Again, there's variables in here, right? It's going to depend. Is somebody a single parent? Do they have 2 jobs while they're a single parent? Are you long distance? How early into the dating stage are you? But these will be the sort of things that we'll generally see. And I want you to ask yourself, where I'm at here. If I look at these and I realize these are pretty healthy standards, these are pretty good indicators somebody's interested. Do we have a lot of momentum that we have to build in terms of communication in a relationship dynamic to actually see that we feel like much more fulfilled in the actual conversation? So I want you to ask yourself this question before we get to C, which is what you'll communicate, which is I want you to ask yourself, in a place where I'm like expecting to have healthy standards. So like the standards I would want to set for myself in terms of dating, the things that I would want to make sure are met in terms of dating. The amount of conversation, the amount of interest, the length of text message, these sorts of things. How far off from what I think is a healthy standard after kind of reflecting on these things in part A and part B, how far off is this dismissive avoidant person who I'm seeing, how far off are they from what I think is a healthy standard? And if you find that they're a little bit far off and you want to see more texting or more consistency there, then we can work to communicate these things. But you have to first establish, what you're subconsciously living by, then decide, okay, what is a healthier expectation to have, which is the intention of step B here. And then if there's room to grow, then you go have the conversation. You may find that you're like, you know what, I'm actually okay with this now that I understand the dismissive avoidant. I'm okay with this. And you may need to have this conversation in your back pocket for later. But being clear about this will go a really long way. Now, I do have a course you can check out fully for free, and the video is not quite over yet. I'm going to give you an actual strategy for how to compromise. But it's called How to Master the Dating Stage of Relationships. And you can check it out fully free if you just want to practice like standards, expectations, knowing what yours are, knowing your non-negotiables, just getting really clear and intentional, and then having some powerful tips for how to communicate these things in a way that's not going to push somebody away or feel like it's too much. And also when to appropriately communicate these things as well. So I'll put a link to that course down below if you just want to do like more in-depth work and more exercises around how to really become masterful at dating, and have more successful dates. But this last part here is, if you are communicating to an avoidant in the earlier stages of dating and you're like, you know what, I need a little more text or calling, um, the best way of going about it is to generally be a little bit more high level. So don't tell a dismissive avoidant what they're not doing. Tell them what you would like to see. Okay. There's a big difference between, for example, saying something to somebody like, you don't ever spend enough time with me, versus, hey, I really enjoy hanging out with you. I'd love to spend extra time together this week. One person, in one case, you're going to be heard and somebody's going to understand that you're interested and it's going to feel validating and uplifting. In another case, it's going to feel critical and somebody's going to end up feeling defensive and shut down, which is definitely the response dismissive avoidants are more likely to jump to in the early stages of relationship. So that's going to be really important. And you want to phrase your communication in that way and then say it at a high level. So you may not say, I need to see 16 extra text messages per week, because that feels too specific. And the more specific something is, the more vulnerable it can feel to somebody, and sometimes the more controlling. But if you say in general, hey, consistency is really big for me in communication. And I've really enjoyed chatting with you and getting to know you. And I really like talking to you. So if we could be more consistent, that would be amazing. If you say it like that, you say it at a high level, you say it with a positive, kind of optimistic, validating viewpoint in your communication, that's going to be how it lands the best, particularly with an avoidant, particularly in this early of a stage of dating. So, hopefully, this is helpful for you today. Again, if you want to check out that course for free, just for a limited time, I'll put the link down below, all about how to master dating. And thank you for stopping by. If you're enjoying this channel, please consider subscribing. Appreciate you being here and can't wait to see you in the next video.